Welcome to Episode 2 on Seamly Basics. If you haven't already, go back and watch Episode 1 on parametric modeling, and then come back. Our second topic covers points and lines. Now we can actually start placing points in Seamly 2D. Like I said in the last section, all points start with point A. If you want to look at anything we draw, any objects, you can right-click, go to Properties. You can rename it if you want to, but I usually just leave it as point A, or maybe rename it to A0. The first tool we're going to look at is the point length and angle. So we click that to switch to that tool. And if you ever want to go back to being able to select objects and look at their properties, you want to make sure you're clicking the tool pointer up at the top. So anyway, we'll click point length and angle, and we'll click point A because that's the only place we can click to generate another point. And everything you create in Seamly 2D has to reference something that came before it. So if I click, I now have this line that I can swing around with my pointer, and I think I just want to start by drawing a box. So I'm going to go as horizontal as I can here and click. And one thing I really like about Seamly is there's no guesswork. You can adjust. So if I want to say, well, I want that line to be 10 centimeters, I can click apply, and now it's 10 centimeters. It always names the points in order A, A1, A2, all the way through. I've never gone past A99, so I couldn't tell you what happens there. And then we can select the angle. Now I want to take a second just to talk about angles in Seamly 2D because they're really important. 0 will give me horizontal to the right. 180 will give me horizontal to the left. And then vertically 90 and 270 are going to be the angles you want to use to go straight up and straight down, respectively. If we put something like a 15-degree angle, we could also go negative 15 degrees. So maybe by looking at these numbers, we've kind of discovered that when we reference an angle in Seamly, it always starts from horizontal and goes counterclockwise. So if I want to go 15, 20, I'm going counterclockwise around until I hit 360 degrees, the number of degrees in a circle, coming back to this point. Nothing bad's going to happen if you type in 360 degrees, but do know that if you go beyond 360, like if I were to type in 365, I would be back at 5 degrees. It just continues to loop around. Anyway, let's set that back to 0, so I have my first point. And if you ever need to come back and examine that again, we can hit Properties and look at it. Next, we're just going to move through these in order. I'm going to click Point on Line. Well, now that I have a line, I need to select the first point and the second point, and the order in which you select them does matter. So I'm going to click A and then A1. Then I have to determine the length of my point. So I can type in 1 for 1 centimeters and it'll put A2, but notice it starts from A1. If I wanted to start from the opposite side, I would have to make sure A1 was my first point and A2 was my second point. Now maybe I don't want to say 1 centimeter, maybe I want this to be a certain portion of line A and A1. So I'm going to click the formula toolbar, which is going to be pretty useful to you. So I'm going to delete that. All of your measurements automatically come up down below that you can grab and use. So if I needed a size, if I needed a back measurement, my custom variables are going to end up there. But also as you create things, the lengths of your lines, your line angles, any curves are going to pop up in there so you can reference what you've already done. So I can grab line A1 and say, well, maybe I want it to be 1/3 of the way. Well, there we go. Or 1/4 of the way. And you can always change the color of your points. I tend to just work in black, but it's something you might want to use later on. We'll hit OK. The next tool we're going to look at is midpoint on a line. So you can select any 2 points. Let's use A and A1, and it automatically populates the current length divided by 2 formula for you. If you wanted to, you could copy paste this formula and use it in the point on line tool for the same effect. But it is kind of convenient just to be able to click and have your midpoint. Now the next tool I'm going to show you is the point on a perpendicular line. So let's say I wanted a point coming perpendicular up from the line between A2 and A3. Well, I'll start by clicking A2 first, and that gives me this perpendicular segment that I can move around until I choose which point I want to connect to. So I'm going to click A3. So let's go ahead and give that a length of 5 centimeters and click Apply. Now remember that Seamly likes to move counterclockwise for angles, so if you didn't want it to be a perfect 90-degree perpendicular, you could rotate. Like I'll add 15 degrees in and click Apply just so you can see what that looks like. I don't often rotate from the perpendicular tool, but I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Actually, let's make that a little shorter. We'll click OK. Now notice A4 has a dotted line between it and A2. That means it's not going to automatically show up in our formula wizard unless we draw a line between these 2 points. So I'm going to click Line. I'm going to grab the Line Between 2 Points tool. I'm going to click A2 and then A4. The order in which you click things does matter in Seamly 2D, and I would like this line to be named Line A2, A4 and not A4, A2. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now would be a great time to show you how to delete things, because sometimes you just put them in the wrong spot. So I'm going to click A4 and press delete. And I'm going to get this warning. It's going to say can't delete, the tool has children. And our child happens to be that line we just drew. So we have to delete that first, and then it'll let us delete A4. I'm going to go ahead and put everything back before we move on to the next tool. The next tool we're going to look at is the point on a bisector tool. If I click that, I need to be able to select an angle starting from one leg to the vertex to the other leg. So let's just use A to A2 to A4. And it will automatically bisect that angle for me. And because it's a perpendicular, it bisects into two 45-degree angles. Now I can choose the length if I wanted to. I could say, well, I want that to be 2 centimeters, or I could go into my formula wizard and choose one of my variables. Let's just go ahead and say hat brim length divided by 4, just to show you how that works. And notice again we have a dotted line there. So if I think I'm going to use line A2, A5 later in life, now would be a good time to put a line down between those 2 points. If you don't think you're ever going to need that distance for something, it's okay to leave it as a dotted line. The next point tool we're going to use is going to be the point length to line. So start by selecting the point that you want your line to come from. So if I wanted to extend a line from A4 to meet the line past A1, I would select A4 and then select the first point of your line and the second point of your line. So now let's say I want 12 centimeters to be the length of my line, and that is the length of my line this direction along the hypotenuse. So we're going to hit apply, and I'm going to zoom out. You can use the buttons up here to zoom in and out, or you can control click and scroll, which is what I normally do. So now we've got A6 there. If we go into the properties and adjust it down, I can adjust it to 10, and that'll put it right here. But what happens if I put in a value like 2 centimeters? We know 2 centimeters is not nearly long enough for this hypotenuse to get me past A1. So if we try it, it simply puts our new number on top of the last point we selected. So you have to be careful about that and make sure you're keeping in mind that you are doing the length of the hypotenuse and not some length extending past A1 to A6. And just like the others, this one comes in as a dotted line. So if you think you're going to use this one later, go ahead and fill that in using the line tool now. So the next tool we're going to look at is Intersect, Arc, and Line. So this tool is useful if you have a position where you want to imagine an arc sweeping from one point. So say A4, pretend I have an imaginary arc or circle around it with a radius that can swing out and hit our line down below, our line A to A3. So I'm going to start by selecting the line first. And as always, the order in which you click your points does matter, and I'll show you how in a minute. So we're going to say we want the line from A to A3. Our center of our arc is going to be A4. So then I can select a radius. We're going to say 2 centimeters. Let's go ahead and say 3, just so it's not directly on top. I'll hit OK, and then let's zoom in a little bit so we can really see what we're doing. So the point we created was A7. So that means if I had a radius of 3 centimeters extended from A4 and were to swing that arc down, A7 would be where that arc hits line A to A3. Now if I wanted to extend that a little bit, let's say 12, we can see that it would put that point way off in the distance, and that makes sense because the distance from A4 to A7 is going to be 12. So that's really useful when you want to guarantee how long your hypotenuse is swinging to hit a line. Very similar to the previous tool we looked at. Now let's adjust it again one more time. Let's bring the radius back down to something like 5. And notice that because when we create an arc we go counterclockwise, it's going to hit this section of A to A3, that line. It'll hit this section first and not this section on the right. So what if we wanted A7 to pop up on this other side? Well, we'd have to swap A and A3. Instead of deleting and regenerating, we can just change our first line point and our second line point and hit apply. So now, knowing that we have our first line point being A3, it's going to hit there. So more often than not, when you're working with arc tools and something's popping up on the wrong side or where you don't quite intend it, check and make sure that you've chosen your points in the same order. And I'm going to go ahead and delete A7 just because things are getting a little bit cluttered on our preview here. Okay, to accurately show the next one, I'm going to do just a little bit of setup. I'm going to grab my perpendicular tool and I'm going to create a perpendicular coming down from A3, and we'll make that our new A7. Now the next tool is called Intersect, Axis, and Triangle. I had to think about it for a second. So you start by selecting the first point of the axis you want your triangle to be on. So I am going to treat A to A6 as my axis. Then I'm going to select the first point that I would like to be a part of my triangle, which would be A4, and then the next one will be A7. It's a little bit confusing to see what this tool does, but notice that it's created a triangle with a 90-degree angle on my axis touching the 2 points I've chosen. This one's really kind of a niche case, but I thought I should point out how to use it just in case. Okay, get ready. This next one might very well be my favorite tool when I'm making squares and rectangles, and it's called Intersect XY. So what this does is I can choose any point to be my X or my vertical line, and then any point to be my Y or horizontal line, and it'll give me the point at that intersection. So if I want to point off here to the right of A7, but I want it to be the same distance away as A8 is from A3, and I want to make sure it's vertically in line with A7, so the same distance from A3 to A7 but below A8, I can click A8 and then A7, and it'll generate my new point A9. Super easy. Again, dotted lines, so if you want to reference any of these lines later, you have to go and fill them in. But really, I like this tool. Easy to use, super useful. The next tool I'm going to show you is really useful generating right angles where you need them. This is the intersection of a line and a perpendicular. So I'm going to select my base point, A8, and then you need to select your line. I'm going to select the first point as A5 and the second as A2. So what this does is creates a perpendicular for me. This is a right angle using A8 and then extending line A5 and A2. Okay, the last tool we have in the point category is the intersect line and axis. So we're going to select the first point of a line, and I'm going to use A to A3, and then I can choose any point to operate as my axis. So I'm going to grab A9, and what that does is allow me to generate any point from a line starting at A9 to reach this axis. And again, you can kind of guess and check where you want your point, why you need your point, and then you can go in and update it in properties. So I can adjust that angle if that's something that I know is going to be the same in all of my patterns. This isn't one I use as much as some of the others, but if it's something you think you could play with, I wanted to make sure I showed it to you. Okay, so the last tool I have to show you is the second one in the line category. And I like this one because it's really easy to use and it is useful. This is the Intersect Lines tool. So let's just say that I wanted the point that we would get if we extended A8 to A10 to hit line A9 to A11 here. So we're going to click A8 to A10, click A9 to A11, and there it is. It just extends and generates that intersection for you. And I think that's the last of the point and line tools we have to talk about. Now let's recap part 2. All designs start with point A. There are many different ways to place a point, though they all must reference an object that came before it. You can delete things, but only if no objects reference them. Make sure you delete all of the lines you've drawn to a point before you try to delete it. And going forward in this series, you can use the timestamps below to jump back and review specific tools. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you back here for episode 3 when we talk about curves and splines.